We've had 5 fighters join the Rivals of Aether 2 roster so far, with tons of players speculating who's up to join the cast next. Over the past few months, we've been able to observe a few trends and collect a few hints from the developers to help us narrow down who's coming up in 2026. But before we get started, or maybe while you listen to the video, if you want to participate in my next video, I left a link to a community tier list form that you can fill out in the description. It only takes a few minutes, so no pressure at all. To start, let's get a quick rundown of who we know won't be joining the roster this year, just to narrow down our scope. First of all, we know that we won't be getting another Earth Elemental according to the developers for a good while, meaning that characters like Sylvanos or Hamir, or maybe another Dirt Eater like Olympia, won't be joining us anytime soon. I would also imagine this year that we're getting at least one Air and one Water Elemental, since currently they're the only fighters that have 3 characters in that category. So, rounding them off in at least 4 to wrap up the year would just make sense. I could also imagine a fire character getting added since we haven't had a new one since the game came out with Forceburn. But they also have more reps than air and water right now, so I'm not too sure when their next character would be necessarily. But it's likely we'll probably see at least one this year. Moving away from the elements and onto a less concrete rule, we've also had 3 of our 5 newcomers be heavy or heavy adjacent in the case of Lorena, I guess. So I don't think that we'll be seeing another large, big-boned friend like me for at least another 2 fighters or so. That one's not an exact science, of course, but I don't imagine that we'll see anyone like Eliana or Hodan from the base roster of Rivals 1 super soon because of that, as much as I would love to have them back. This leads me to believe that our next few fighters will most likely either be light or midweight due to this. However, light and midweights have a lot of diverse playstyles within their weight classes. These weight classes support characters that are zoners, swordies, like to rush down or maybe brawl, or even trappers or puppet characters traditionally. So, to continue looking at trends in the roster, let's go ahead and classify each fighter into a general broad archetype to narrow down what kind of characters that we're missing. Obviously, it's a little hard to pinpoint exact archetypes, but I did my extramost bestest. In the rushdown category, we have Zetterburn, Raster ideally, Rano on a good day, Olympia, Maple, and debatably Orcane since he has a few zoner characteristics, but currently, those parts of his kit aren't really the best at that. As far as heavies go, we have Loxodon, Crag, Lorena, Edalus, and Galvin. For swords, we have Clarin and Fleet, but she's also like a hybrid zoner, so kind of a swordie with a good disjoint. And obviously Loxodon, who we already classified as a heavy, but he's also kind of a weird hybrid of the 2 classes. And finally, as far as zoners go, we just really have Absa, who's all alone in this category. Obviously, since Rivals is a faster paced game, zoners do look a little different, but that's why I classified Arcane and Fleet into other categories since, truthfully, their zoning tools aren't commonly used to keep opponents out, as much as they are used to push combos or move forward in neutral. Meaning that we'll probably see at least one fighter added to this archetype throughout this year just to expand its presence. But I don't think this is the only archetype we'll see, since it's commonly a frustrating one to play against. Because of this, I imagine that we'll see at least one zoner, as well as a swordie or disjoint-based fighter, since we haven't had one in a good minute since, well, Forceburn, and potentially a new brawler rushdown-esque character, since our last really fast-paced fighter was Olympia and she came out almost a year ago. For one final hint that points to an archetype that will be seen this year that I haven't shared with you yet, we know that we're getting a character with some kind of holdable, grabbable item, thanks to Dan giving us a little teaser at EVO. Obviously, that does point us towards someone like Mollo, but it could also be someone like Ani from Dreams of Aether, or someone completely new to the Rivals universe. Before we speculate on individual fighters, however, I want to really quickly remind you to use code LASTSTOCK in the in-game shop. It helps my channel and my free online weeklies more than you can imagine, so thanks tons for watching, and let's lock down my predictions for this year's fighters. I think I'd like to pick 2 fighters from each element that we know in the Rivals lore that could be coming sometime this year and fall in line with the hints and clues that we've gathered already. First, let's start with Pomme, an Air Elemental returning fighter from Rivals of Aether 1. Pomme is a zoner type character, with 2 distinct projectiles, ranging from a storable Dr. Mario pill type move, and Vince, her kind, loving, and well-meaning bodyguard, who gives you a big hug on hit and tosses you up for a combo. Pomme also mixes in ideas from classic fan-favorite platform fighter characters like Princess Peach, with a mid-air float allowing for lots of new tech ranging from high APM float cancels to new recovery and edgeguard mix-ups. She's also on the lighter weight side of things, and I imagine she'll be around the same height and size as Olympia without the insane burst movement that comes with Olympia. On the topic of that movement tech though, she has her own movement ability to build upon her float, which would really help flesh out the roster just a touch in my opinion, since currently only a very small portion of the cast have dedicated movement tech that you use in every game. Truthfully, I put Pomme up front here as she's my most expected fighter, since she fills out the role of a returning fighter, which we haven't had in a minute if you don't really count Lorena, and she has zoning tools, movement tools, a deep combo tree, and would be really unique compared to our current roster, especially when thinking about the previous 2 editions. Finally, the reason why I think we'll be seeing Pomme this year is we did get a teaser from one of the developers that loosely points to her. I'm not going to post the teaser here since I'm not really sure if they want it being passed around too much, and I personally don't really think it directly proves that Pomme is this year, but there's a strong correlation between her and the teaser, so I wouldn't be shocked. If you really want to know, I'm sure you can check out the comments. Next, let's talk about Mollo in the fire category. Mollo is also a returner from Rivals 1, just like Pomme. He's an item character, and as I mentioned earlier, he uses bombs to control space and combo opponents. However, in Rivals 1, there's not really a held item mechanic. Mollo's bombs get knocked around by Mollo pulling them with his neutral special, and then selecting a bomb. And then he can throw them with a strong attack input, or a special attack. I imagine this will be loosely reworked in Rivals 2, still allowing him to throw bombs in the same way, but also allowing opponents to pick them up and use them back against him similar to Snake in Smash Ultimate. This could point to Mollo being our item character and zoner, as well as a returner for this year. However, since Pomme is a zoner and also a returning fighter just like Mollo, I'm not really sure if I feel too confident on them releasing back-to-back in the same time window. I could see something like Pomme or Mollo getting announced as our DLC Fighter 6, and then the other being announced as DLC Fighter 8, with DLC 7 maybe being a Rushdown or Swordy to break it up. But we did also get Galvan and Lorena back-to-back, and while they feel very unique from each other in gameplay, on paper they do have a lot of similarities, like being heavy, having brawler and grappler properties, and using a metal or magnetic theme. So I might be way off the mark here, and something like Archetypes releasing back-to-back isn't really something on Aether Studios' mind. For our last hint towards Mollo, we know that characters have a lot of time and care put into their design docs, and a long time ago, in a dev stream or interview that I've long lost, I remember a dev mentioning that they took a while to come up with the design for Mollo's gun that made it fit the game's fun, flashy style, while still being viewable as a gun. This means Mollo's at least some kind of stage of development behind the scenes. Whether that's him being contained to design documents, or being playtested to release just in a few months, I'm not really sure. But I think he's really likely to release this year, and I really want him back. I miss you, Mollo, my man. Keeping on the topic of item characters, I want to talk about Ani from Dreams of Aether. That game is so sick, by the way, it's like $3, so if you have time to check it out, you definitely should. What most people don't know about Ani is that she was actually a Rivals 1 workshop character, and Aether Studios acquired the rights to her to add her into Dreams of Aether. Unfortunately, Ani doesn't have an element already confirmed for her in-game appearance. However, for this video, I think she would slot best into the air element, since it fits her aesthetics and movement best in my opinion. Hodon's kinda similar in this idea that he doesn't really feel like one element, but he's considered a water character for the game, so I'm kinda thinking we can use that same reasoning to put Ani into air. In her workshop gameplay, Ani spawns items and has lots of fun, flashy moves that she uses to combo opponents. I could definitely see them allowing Ani to pull from a set amount of random items, similar to Peach in Melee, and not necessarily confining her to a specific item like Mollo Bomb. I think this also lines up pretty closely with what the devs have talked about when they mention their vision for what kind of items they want to add to the game, since they've said in interviews that items that apply effects already in the game could be pretty interesting, which would line up with how Ani plays in the Rivals 1 workshop. Ani, just like Pomme, would be an air elemental zoner, so just like Mollo, I don't imagine Ani and Pomme releasing back-to-back. However, I think it might be more likely for someone like Mollo and then Ani to launch back-to-back, since one would be a newcomer and one would be a returning fighter, depending on how you view the Rivals 1 workshop characters. Moving away from zoners, I want to talk about a new water elemental fighter that might see a spotlight this year. Slade from Dungeons of Aether has been a popular fan favorite, and I could definitely see him slotting into a summer release to potentially break up the launch of 2 zoners throughout the year. In Dungeons of Aether, Slade's moveset revolves around moving fast and stealing from his opponents, meaning that he could fill the gap of a highly technical, fast sortie. Since while I imagine on paper Claren fills that niche, I think that we all know from her gameplay experience that that's not really what she's got going on. As I mentioned as well, Slade is able to steal money within his combat in dungeons, meaning that I could see something like Shovel Knight's currencies system returning, or potentially a brand new mechanic that allows you to spend money or stamina points to empower a move or movement option, similar to how Fleet's wind chime and stamina meter work together. In Slade's favor, I imagine the devs want to give us at least 1 or 2 more Dungeons of Aether reps throughout the game's life cycle. And with Slade being the most popular by far, I really wouldn't be shocked if we saw him this year, and if not now, then sometime down the road. Staying on the topic of Dungeons of Aether reps, the second fire character that I would like to see return to Rivals 2 this year would be Artemis from, well, Dungeons of Aether. Artemis plays a pretty sizable role in the portion of the plot of the game and comic centering around Zitterburn, Forestburn, Lockstaunt, and Claren, being that she works directly underneath Lockstaunt, kind of like a soldier or knight, but they also kind of have a rocky relationship. I imagine if the Rivals 2 story mode wants to cover this arc, doing it from the perspective of Artemis could be really sick, and obviously she'd need to be in the game for that to happen. In Dungeons of Aether, Artemis has a pretty sizable halberd, which might be a little larger than something like Claren's beam sword, but smaller than Lockstaunt's axe. Her kit revolves around doing more damage the lower Artemis's health is, as well as having moves that lower your own health to do more damage. Personally, I'm not really a fan at all of mechanics in fighting games that reward characters for being at high damage or losing, like Lucario Aura or Joker's Arsene. But I think the Rivals dev team has a better track record of designing competitively interesting characters than its Smash Bros. Counterparts, so I'm sure we could find something that would work out. On the flip side, having moves that self-damage Artemis for using her stronger moves might not be so bad. I think there's a lot of ways to change how a character is played and countered with this mechanic in mind, and something that I wouldn't be against seeing in Rivals 2 down the road. Unlike Slade, however, I'm not really convinced that this year is Artemis's year. And while I do think she'll show up eventually, something tells me that if we do get Mollo or Slade, we probably wouldn't also be getting Artemis right away, since adding 2 fire characters would need another UI rework, and adding 2 characters from Dungeons back to back might feel a little bit hasty and they might want to be spaced out over the next few years. I personally wouldn't mind it because I think the Dungeons designs are insanely sick, but I think it'd also be sick to see them spaced out throughout the game's lifespan. That leaves us with just one water fighter left as a potential fighter this year. Water's the only element who hasn't had some kind of newcomer yet from the game's lore, with Orcane, Rano, and Edalis all being returners from Rivals 1, so I think there's room here for a new face to show up that could be someone like Master Kai, Rano's mentor, or one of Orcane's siblings from the demigod. I think they're siblings at least, they're all like children of the god, so I don't really know what you call that. Or maybe someone completely new that we don't know about. I could also truthfully see Hodon joining the cast at the end of the year, since while he is a heavy, he has a unique gameplay loop and combat style that's notably unique from the other heavies that we currently have in Rivals 2. So I don't necessarily think it'd be a bad thing or feel bloated to see him join the roster. For this prediction slot though, I'm gonna go ahead and give it to Master Kai, since I think that Rano's lore is underbaked compared to the rest of the Rivals 1 roster, and giving him a character to relate to and build a story off of would make a lot of sense for him. However, I also imagine the developers would like to give us a brand new character from the Aetherverse like Galvin, so maybe this slot should go to one of those as well. Before we wrap up today's video, I do want to acknowledge the 2 Rivals 1 returners that I didn't mention today, Eliana and Sylvanos. Eliana is personally my favorite Rivals 1 fighter that hasn't been brought back yet, since I think her kit goes above and beyond the typical heavyweights, archetypes, and just generally a platform fighter's archetypes. If Ani wasn't considered an air element, and is instead her own element, I'd imagine that Eliana could come out sometime sooner than I would think. However, I do think that Ani will be an air element, and if her and Pomme are both added this year, then I can't really see Eliana getting a front stage position anytime soon. Sylvanos is kind of in the same boat right now, where if all the elements did have a similar amount of fighters, then I'd probably be guessing at him coming out soon too. But since we just had 2 Earth heavyweights added back to back, and we know we're not getting another one for a while, he simply didn't make the cut of today's list. Finally, to wrap us up, I think Mollo, Pomme, and Slade are most likely to join this year's lineup, with Pomme or Mollo dropping in the spring, Slade in the summer, and then the other one dropping in the winter. I could see Ani taking Pomme or Mollo's spot, as well as imagining Artemis or a new water elemental fighter taking Mollo or Slade's spot. All of these characters on screen right now are pretty likely to show up this year, but I also imagine we'll get some kind of surprise from Ether Studios sometime this year. As we know though, Genesis is just a week away, so we'll probably see some kind of fighter revealed there to coincide with the Rivals 2 Championship season wrapping up. As always, thanks so much for watching today's video, and let me know who you want to see join the Rivals 2 roster. Personally, I'd be thrilled for any of the returning characters since I love them all so much. And don't forget to submit your community tier list with the form being in the description of this video. I'll see you in the next one though. Bye for now.